Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us on another episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Today's guest is Tim Gore. Tim is a U.S. Army veteran who experienced homelessness and abuse when he was young. He recently came to understand that his experiences as a youth and a soldier contributed to his development of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Tim is an accomplished ultrarunner and is gearing up for a 150-mile trail run through the majestic North Dakota badlands. The run will raise awareness for veterans experiencing PTSD and increase funding for veteran services. All right. Well, hi, Tim. Thanks so much for being our guest today. We're so happy to have you with us.
Hi, Emily. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
So some of our listeners might not be familiar with you. So what can you tell us about yourself?
Well, I spent 20 years in the military from the time I was 18 till I was 38, and I, retired. Worked for those folks for a while, and then went to work nonprofit. And now I'm back working for the Army Space and Missile Defense Command, which I've been with most of my life. But during my Army time, I deployed a couple of times, was in combat, and was a drill sergeant, and saw all kinds of different things, as one, you imagine one might do over 20 years in military service. And I've got two real talents. One is running, and the other one is talking, mostly talking about running. So that's about it. That's about it for me.
If I understand correctly, you actually developed PTSD as a result of your Army service. Is that right?
So my PTSD actually started, I didn't know it at the time, right? It was PTSD, or what was happening. So I was sexually abused by 4 different people from the age of 8 till I was 12. So that kind of, already going into the Army, I already had that, foundation where PTSD, could occur. And during my time in the Army, as a drill sergeant, I had a couple of people threatened and then committed suicide.
Oh, man.
So the biggest part of that was I didn't deal with that very well. I probably could have done more. Not that you can ever save anybody if they want to do that, but I probably could have done more to listen to that person, and I could have reacted better. And so that's one of the things I live with on a daily basis. And and I deployed to the 1st Gulf War. So all the things that are associated with war and kind of the stuff that you see and hear about. So, I already had that foundation of, being susceptible to that. And then during my time in service is probably where it developed mostly.
And how does it affect you today?
Like all kinds of ways, right? That I didn't even know about until my counselors. I laugh about it because, I went through it, and it's good to be, you're not on the other side of it, but, you have a system, you have routines and things that help you maintain, the semblance of normalcy. So this is one of the ways it affects you, right? So you get disoriented sometimes, right? I get disoriented because those memories will come back, right? And so you're just taken back to that moment in time, and then you're just there, you kind of forget what's going on around you. So there's a word for that, but I'm like totally clueless as to what it is right now. So that's one way. Another way is hypervigilance, like so when you go through your PTSD evaluation for the military, you have to go through it. My counsel wrote a letter, you have to go through this other thing and another thing, right? You have 3 or 4 things, people looking at you, every one of them. I didn't even know this was a thing, right? It said hypervigilance. I'm like, I don't get it. I'm just being me. I thought everybody was like this, but
yeah.
And the loud noises, and I don't like crowds anymore. I really don't. People see me, they see me on social media, and I'm doing things all the time. But if you watch really close, I don't do them around a whole lot of people. There'll be 3 or 4. I'll be on a mountain somewhere. I'll be on a run, a 107-mile run where there's like 12 people.
Yeah.
Along them. So I don't like to be around a lot of people. It's more of I don't know how to explain it, So that's how it affects me in the daily, and memory loss and lack and sleep and dreams and all those kinds of things. So it's something that you deal with. I'm one of the lucky ones, right? lucky, I get to go to a counselor who I really appreciate and really, really knows me, and that mitigates a lot of this. And I know I can always bring that back, things to him. So, and I have a strong support network. So.
Yeah. Well, certainly from an ADA perspective, PTSD is one of those conditions that usually is going to qualify as a disability per the ADA. I wonder if you consider yourself a person with a disability, and if that has been hard to come to terms with as a veteran and an athlete.
Oh, yeah. You know, when you start doing any kind of social work or any kind of volunteer work, you think, well, I'm going to go help someone, right? That's what it's going to be about. Usually okay, that does happen, but usually it's you finding out about yourself and the things that are going on with you. So I mentioned I work nonprofit, so I worked at the Independent Center for a while. And at the Independent Center, they try to create independent lives for people with disabilities. They do have a lot of different programs, and I never, not once, really, I've heard it talked about. I had my PTSD evaluation at that point. In the back of my head, I knew, though, I knew something was there, but I never said, "Oh, I'm a person with a disability," until I looked at the letters, until they said until my disability rating for the Army or the military went up to 60%. And I'm like, okay, I'm a person with a disability. You feel, how do you come to terms with it? I'm still coming to terms with it, but I'm surrounded by great company.
Oh, I was just going to say that's one of the things that we often talk about during our trainings and things when we talk about the numbers of people with disabilities. If we say 57 million people in America have a disability, that number is probably actually lower than the reality, because you do have people, especially those with invisible disabilities, that don't necessarily identify that way or haven't quite come to terms with that or have an identity that conflicts with disability. So I think that it sounds like your story is a pretty solid example of that.
Because nobody else knows. You see somebody that's using a wheelchair, right? And I think people are actually, more comfortable engaging with people that they can actually see and know have a disability. And then they start interacting with me and they wonder why this guy is different, why he's a little hyper, why is right. But you don't think that this is a person with a disability, because I'm in decent shape. I run a lot. I work out, and so people, that's what they see. They don't see the reasons you're doing a lot of those things either. It's not just because there's reasons that I do that stuff, right? And I'm actually dating another person right now who has an invisible disability as well. It's traumatic brain injury. You can't see it, you can't, but it's there, right? And so she won't come to terms with it. So I don't know that she's to come to terms with that yet, right? And so it's different, that's for sure. And so it's a daily thing. Everything's a daily reset almost to try to, work through all of these different facets of PTSD, whether it's from how do I engage in this crowd, or how do I, get past this certain moment, to it's coming to terms with I might be a person with a disability, be a little different than others. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, by the time our listeners hear this, you will be either have finished or be almost done with a 150-mile trail run through the North Dakota badlands. So what can you tell us about that and the significance of that run?
So one way or the other, by the time they hear this, I will be done. Whether they drag me out on a helicopter somewhere or I finished it, right? So this race is called it's on the Majestic Trail in North Dakota. Most people haven't heard of it. It goes right through the badlands of North Dakota. Most people don't even know there's badlands in North Dakota. They think they're all in South Dakota. So it goes right through the badlands, 17,000 feet of elevation gain, over 151 miles. And it's unsupported. I have a team, they're veteran related team. There's 2 people that are going with me to make sure that to track me, to make sure we get from point to point, and to make sure there's water and all that. But the race, there's no directions, none of that. So it's all GPS. And the significance of it is being a person with PTSD. Well, another thing about this, the run is to raise money for Mount Carmel's Veteran Service Center for their counseling services, to try to help take the numbers of veteran suicide to zero. Because right now, since 9/11, we've had 33,000 or over 30,000 veteran suicides or active duty. 7,000 people have died in military operations since then. That's just too much, right? So, and we know that counseling can get people, take them out of that cycle, that suicide cycle, that whatever that is, right? If you can break through that. So this, why the 150 miles in the middle of the Badlands, unsupported in the dark, relates to this endeavor to end suicide, veteran suicide, is we're all kind of like that. Like, I know with my PTSD, I didn't know what in the world was going on. I've never thought about committing suicide. I've thought about it with what it would be like without me, like how it would be better for other people, but I've never thought about the whole thing. So you're in a dark spot already, right? And until somebody comes and shines a light for you and then says, no, go this way, and you're seeing things that aren't there, right? You're seeing that, you're not seeing the truth, right? And that's what is important about, like, that's why it's symbolic, because you're just out there alone. But I have a team that's looking out for me, and they have the light, right? I know all I want to do is get to them. And that's what, kind of gets you through it. And when you're a person with PTSD or a person thinking about suicide a lot, you just think that you're in it alone, but you really aren't. Like, that's what I would want people to know about this. Like, I don't know most of these other veterans. I don't need to. Like, I know that I care about them, and I know that this is what I want to do to try to help in this. It's very sad, right, that we lose 30,000 of our people who volunteer to go, protect the country to suicide, when we could, if they knew we were there for them, it might make a difference.
So you're doing this 150-mile run mostly unsupported, and is there some sort of symbolism there with what it's like to live as a person with PTSD?
Yeah, there's some symbolism there for sure. All experience PTSD differently. For me, there's at least some symbolism to it, because you're in your head an awful lot, right? And you're just telling yourself all these stories that may or may not be true. Some of them are things like, well, I would do that, but I don't think that I can do it, because whatever this is, whatever that is, I would try to do this job. For me, this is an example. I would try to go for this job, which I'm fully qualified for and probably would get it. But the back of my head says, what comes up? Remember, Tim, when you were a drill sergeant and you had that soldier that actually you could have talked to differently, you could have helped differently, you could have just interacted with differently, and maybe he wouldn't have committed suicide, right? Mm-hmm. That is every day. So yes, so you're in your head a lot, and this is my fourth over 100-mile race. You tell yourself a lot of things out there, right? You tell yourself a lot of things, and you start saying, I'm not going to be able to make it. I'm horrible, and blah, 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 right? And then you have the team. Again, it's having somebody else that comes in and says, because they can see the truth, right? They know how much you have left in you. They know what you've done before, and they know you. So they encourage you, and they know, and once you find that person, just like if you're going through, if you have PTSD, you can find that counselor or whatever person to help you, whoever it is. You come out of this funk, you come out of this line of thought that you were thinking, like how you weren't worthy enough, or how you're just not enough. And somebody else tells you you are, and not just somebody else, but somebody that you trust. That's one of the ways that it's similar. But a lot of ways, like you get into dark places when you're out there. You get into dark places, anytime after, like, I don't even really feel like running until after the 7th or 8th mile. And then something hits and it just goes kind of downhill, or, you get back wrapped around in that thought process in your head. Again, it's an invisible disability. You can't see all of this happening in my brain space, right? But it's happening. It's like, what do they call that? I mean, it's physically happening in there, or mentally happening. And so so you just get wound up, and that happens out there too. I just get wound up and start thinking other things other than that I can do it. And I don't know. So there's a lot of similarities to it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So what are some myths or misconceptions about PTSD that you would like to dispel?
Okay, one of the myths is, I think, or misconceptions is that everybody goes to combat has PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always the case, right? And the other myth is you have to see combat to get
Mm-hmm.
to have PTSD. Do you know that we have more people who have PTSD since 9/11 that did not deploy? Another one is, well, if you have PTSD, you're violent, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not in, you can read my whole write-up, it's not in there at all, right? No violent thoughts or whatever, Those are some of them I can think off the top of my head. Like you can look at me, people who know me, I'm a very positive, energetic person, right? You wouldn't know that they know that I'm not a violent person, right? They know that that's not who I am, but they also don't believe I have PTSD, I bet you. Once you try to marry the two up, right? And then they're like, no, that's not true because he's not a violent person, but it is. Like you don't, it's invisible. You don't see what's going on the daily, like the stuff we've already talked about.
Well, you mentioned that you worked previously at the local independent living center. And I'm curious to know if that's kind of when you learned about the Americans with Disabilities Act, or if you were aware of it before that.
I was aware of it before that. I'm pretty astute on current events and whatnot. And I think George Bush Sr. signed it, right?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And my daughter has Down syndrome. I know, but I've known about it for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, but you know what I know a lot better now? What curb cuts are and how long it takes to get across a stoplight if you're in a wheelchair and all of these other things, right?
Yeah. And how do you feel like the ADA impacts your life?
People with visible, invisible disabilities, whoever, are getting equal treatment and equal protection, and the modifications, workplace
Mm-hmm.
modifications and stuff like that, right? Uh, you guys are out there making sure that happens. So that just for me, like as a person with an invisible disability, having an advocate out there, having a bunch of advocates out there is a huge thing. For my daughter, like without the ADA, we would have never had IEPs and all of that, to get so my daughter could go to school, to
Mm-hmm.
high school with every other person, right? And
Right.
then what happens to those people if they don't get to meet my daughter, right? This is just on and on and on. So it affects me on the daily. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what do you wish you would have known about accessibility or disability rights when you first got your PTSD diagnosis, or maybe when you first acquired PTSD?
That there were invisible disabilities, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Because before I was diagnosed and all, before, like I didn't even get into talking about the sexual abuse until 2011, which is after all the other things that happened in my life with the military PTSD. So that's how it all started to unravel. If I had known the ADA was out there talking about, or that there was talk out there about, hey, if this has happened to you in your life, you might have PTSD, you might have this, and you might need to talk to somebody, right? I think that by the time it was 2011, I was 44 years old. It would have been nice to have known it at a way younger age, right? And probably, like I had 3 failed marriages
Mm-hmm.
that couldn't have all been them, right? It wasn't all their fault. So I might have been able to mitigate some of those things inside of me, the effects that the PTSD was already having on me then. I think I would have had a much different life. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So just general awareness and education around, the resources that were available to you, right? And
if I'd have had
yeah.
that, and I have it now, like it's very beneficial to me now, even when I interact with my significant other person right now, knowing what I know about it and knowing, it's it's made my life a lot fuller now.
So what would you like listeners to know about supporting specifically veterans with PTSD?
Like we talked about earlier, there's some myths around PTSD. Not everybody's violent. Most
Right.
people aren't. You don't have to go to combat to have PTSD. That person that's being really quiet and wanting to stay away from crowds, they're not always just shy, right? There's something there. I would want them, we say people get all patriotic and like they wave the flag, they wave the flag, they wave the flag. And that's great. I get it. But I also need you to show up at places where people with PTSD, veterans with PTSD might end up sometimes, like at Springs Rescue Mission, which is our local, rescue mission here. Other homeless service providers, like also Westside Cares that we have here. Mm-hmm. Salvation Army. We have a whole lot of veterans with PTSD there. If you want to be patriotic, besides waving the flag, which is great, let's say, get involved down there. That's what I want you to do, and see what it's like to meet people with PTSD who don't have anything because they can't get to the VA right now or whatever. Figure out how we can help in that, how we can do that. And then we'll start ending veteran suicide and all of those things. And go visit, we have a veteran service center here called Mount Carmel, which takes care of all kinds of things. They've helped me immensely. They didn't have counseling when I was going through all this. They do now. So when I started my journey, they actually referred me to the people who did help me. Go to places like that and just meet people. Even if you're not a veteran, we don't care. Come down there and get a tour and figure what it's like. Get involved, right? And see, make that invisible disability visible to you so that you can maybe help a veteran, not go down that road of suicide.
So Tim, you've sounds like you've been through so much in your life. I'd really love to know, what would you say to listeners who maybe are feeling defeated right now, either because of a personal struggle or because of current events or something else? How do you deal with that?
I have a shirt. I usually have it on, but it's dirty right now. And it says, "You are not alone. You are not alone." I don't care who you are. Somebody out there cares about you, right? Even if it's just me and I don't even know you. Right? I don't know you. I care about you. That's why I would go out and do 150 miles, right? And I would risk life, limb injury. And I'm 54. I'm getting too old to do this stuff. But I know that if we can stop one person, I don't care if it's just one, from committing suicide, one veteran, then it's worth it, right? And I would want them to know that I would run that. I would run it twice. I would run as far, as much as I needed to. That's my only talent. Remember, I got this and I can talk. So that's what I would want them to know, that there's a whole bunch of people out there that really, really care about you. But when you're at the shelter or you're wherever, you can't feel that. You can't, that takes work and it takes time to break through. And it's another thing I would tell people who are out there and who want to interact, it's not going to be a one-time deal. You're going to have to show, you're going to have to pay attention. You're going to get involved, and it's going to be a commitment. And you, in the end, are going to be better for that.
All right. Well, last question here, Tim. Where can our listeners go to get in touch with you or learn more about you?
If people wanted to get in touch with me and learn a lot more about me, there is no secret about this. I'm very prolific on Facebook and Instagram and all the things, right? So you can find me there. Facebook, just Google my name and it shows up. I'm not the singer in Nashville, although I'm from Nashville. There's a singer in Nashville named Tim Gore, and I'm not him. Yeah, I'll be some kind of run. I'll be in a running outfit or something. Instagram, I'm Colorado Runner 67, naturally, right? And it'd be great if you also went to Mount Carmel's site, Mount Carmel's Veteran Service Center, and followed them and whatnot. You see everything about the race there too, and if you Google Buck 50 Challenge, Tim Gore, there'll be some news stories and this podcast.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted and produced by Emily Schumann, and our sound engineer is Jessica Lucania. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DP0094-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.